Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast. Conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Hey, Ephrata Community Church, it is great to be with you once again. Welcome to this week's podcast. We take time to unpack the service from the weekend prior, and then look ahead and then just have some fun. So, Jim, good morning to you. Welcome.
Guten Morgen, Matthew.
So this past weekend, we started a new series, and it's called Entrusted. And Kevin was, this series, 4 or 5 weeks. And
4, yeah.
4 weeks.
I was one of 3 more.
You got that?
Give or take.
Give or take. Where we're going to be talking about finances and just what does it mean, the kingdom perspective of finances, how we need to be handling them as those who follow Jesus. And so Kevin brought that message this weekend. Mm-hmm. And I've just heard so many good things coming out of it. And one of my favorite things to be a part of week in and week out is the ministry after the service, where we invite people to the front and just the different people receiving prayer, responding so well to the invitation that Kevin put out in this weekend's message. It was solid. But want to start off with one thing that Kevin, emailed us last week. He emailed all the pastors. What is your best financial decision and what was your worst financial decision? And he kept them anonymous from the front. But Jim, I thought it would be awesome if you would disclose to everyone, what was your worst and best, if you don't mind.
I did not hit send on that email.
You didn't show up?
I did not show up.
Well, then
in that.
now's the opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. 2 words: sailboat.
Okay, is that both the best and the worst? Is that right?
No, it was the worst, flat out. I bought a $1,500 27-foot sailboat when I lived in New England.
That sounds like a good price.
No, it was dirt cheap on the front end, but you can't just pull a sailboat out of the water, one of these fixed keel sailboats. So let's just say that thing slowly ate me alive. Mm-hmm. And the vision I had for how I was going to use it was one of those decade markers in your life. It was an accidental midlife crisis, face the fact. So sailboat.
How long ago was that?
I want to talk about, Matt.
Oh, that's too bad.
See, finances are hard to talk about.
Yes, not just
and
for
your
you,
age,
but for many people.
10 years ago it was.
Yeah, which is why this is such a great topic to talk about.
It is.
Because it's one that we all can relate to. Everybody's made a bad decision. Yours is a sailboat. What about the good decision?
Oh, good decision would be generosity, just like Kevin said. Matter of fact, when he was saying it, something about I had a disciple when I was younger that was just generous and sat me down and reminded me the power of generosity. We would now call it paying it forward in our culture. Like
Sure.
You do something and watch the ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And so I actually became fascinated with the ripple effect of generosity. It was right after I got saved in my early 20s, and you wanted to know me then because I was making money, and if you were up to something in the world, I was going to give you money for it. And it just was so fun.
Cool. Yeah.
And it just said, I just kept seeing God provide for me after being generous. So I loved it.
That's awesome. I totally interpreted the questions, I think, in a way that I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're going to confess yours here, right?
Well, oh, sure. Well, no, we just wanted to hear yours. No, but seriously,
way to draw that out.
Like everybody shared the bad one. Mine was the college education. Like I had no vision for college. It was just what you should do after you graduate high school. So I had a girlfriend at the time, and she went to Millersville University, so that's where I went. And my dad owned a business, so I'm like, well, I guess I'll get a business degree. And I only
you were Captain Obvious, weren't you, at that time?
I couldn't even tell you what was dominating the thoughts of my mind. It was just driven by whatever I wanted to do in the moment. Yeah. It's amazing, the stark contrast between the way I think now and the way I thought then.
That's right.
But yeah, after 2 years, and it was probably, I think, around $20,000, $22,000. I'm like, I just paid $22,000 for this. Like, what am I doing? And then that was it.
Yeah.
The best decision. So what I found myself laughing as Kevin reads them because I'm thinking, well, surely we're sitting with, a bunch of pastors answering this because they're like, deciding to work with my spouse in our finances, or Jim, solid. You're like, generosity, love giving, and we decided to have a budget and stick to the budget. I'm like, you guys are morons. Like, that is not your worst or your best decision. Like, to me, I'm just like, best decision without Any pause was the home that we bought. We bought at foreclosure. Now it's called house hacking. Then this is 2012. That term wasn't coined yet. But yeah, what that just did for us financially, where we are now because of that, I was like, that's one of the best decisions. Actually, the one answer I wanted to give was the engagement ring for Misha. And then I'm like, nah, it's a good decision, but it's more on the cheesy side. I just feel like I couldn't do that.
But you have to admit, come on, even the way you and Misha do real estate, there is a combined relationship dynamic and intimacy in it. So yeah,
that's true.
It's just like a budget.
Yeah, that's true. You're not wrong.
Yep.
So anyway, solid teaching this weekend. And Jim, I wanted to throw to you because you mentioned before this podcast started something about a divine paradox.
Yeah.
I want to give you some time to unpack that.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. Kevin really lit up my brain on Sunday. And I have those moments where I sat there. I'm like, hey, I just got impacted by something, and I really reflected on it throughout the day. Remember, I hear the thing on Saturday and then again on Sunday. Something about the teaching moved this whole conversation about tithing way beyond finances and resourcing and into truly a matter of the heart, like a disposition. And so I went back and just meditated on the passage that Kevin chose to use, which we know is the classic Matthew 6. It's right after Jesus would have been doing the Sermon on the Mount stuff. And matter of fact, some people have this lumped in with the whole Sermon on the Mount. And I'll just remind you how Jesus starts off. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal," right? "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth or rust destroy and thieves nor break in and steal." And then he goes on a few verses later to bring us to this thing of, hey, why do you worry? And it's fascinating. His real point here is, I want you to be less anxious people. I want fear to be gone from your life. I want anxiety to be gone from your life. Oh, by the way, guess where the starting point is? Make sure that you live a life oriented toward divine things, toward heaven, and I guarantee you anxiousness becomes a thing of the past. So I even love the fact that tithing, and Kevin brought this out so well, it is actually a spiritual warfare feature as well against anxiety and fear in our lives. So I would even encourage some of you that might be wrestling with anxiety, fear, paralysis in decision-making, indecisiveness. Tithing has such a powerful spiritual dynamic, I believe. And Jesus has given us some hints into this. Now, I want to reiterate something. It's not about bringing more money into this church. If it was about that, none of us would touch this with a 10-foot pole. But it's about some of the role that tithing plays in spiritual breakthroughs. And so it seems like a paradox. Give up your first fruits on this end and watch what happens when it comes to peace, contentment on this end and success. It's just, I love it.
Yeah, you mentioned the word paradox. I mean, much of the kingdom, as we know it, is a paradox, juxtaposed against what it means to be alive on this earth. But Jesus shows up and says, hey, if you want to live, you must die. And in the same way, if you want, the Malachi verse that Kevin brought out, where God is speaking and he says, test me in this, which the way Kevin introduced them, what we know now is the 90-day challenge to the congregation.
I love it.
Which is taking God at his word, where he says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse so that there may be food in my house, and test me in this. If I will not open up for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. And then listen, and this is the spiritual dynamic you bring up. Then I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it will not destroy the fruit of the ground, nor your vine or the field and its grapes. And so I think it's just, there absolutely is a spiritual dynamic.
Oh, man, I think it's all over it. And I also want to remind you that when it comes to these kind of breakthroughs, I love the fact that we're part of a community that is willing to help you absorb some of the risk. Let me repeat what Kevin just put out there. We've known for a couple months he was rolling us around in his head. The 90-day challenge, let me remind you what it is. It is asking people, if you will tithe, after 3 months you have not seen God working in your finances toward the positive, we will give back to you the complete amount of the tithe you gave in that 3 months. Now think about what we just did as a community. Here's the power of community coming in. We will absorb your fear your anxiety, your risk as a people, because we are so convinced as a people we've seen God move in this area. So another shout out to community where we're like, what a chance right now. And we will make sure, don't be bashful. If God doesn't show up in that 9 months, don't be like, well, I don't want to be the only person that asks for my tithe back. Ask for it back, because we are convinced that we're going to see God move, and we're willing to step in and absorb some of that risk for you.
Yeah, and if you haven't listened to the message, I encourage you to go back. One thing we do here very purposefully is share testimonies. And Kevin, at the end of his talk, shared a testimony about the gentleman with the pumpkin field, which is just an incredible testimony. And what I love about that is, like, when we hear testimony of what Jesus does, it always reveals the nature of who God is, and the reality that what he does for one, he wants to do for another. And so that testimony releases, and I felt it when I heard it, a confidence that God, a confidence in the faithfulness of God as a provider, as well as it put to the side what I felt in myself, any fear, anxiety having to do with, but what if God doesn't? Or, how will this work out?
Right.
All of that was just suppressed immediately in light of the testimony of who Jesus is as provider. So that testimony that Kevin brought about pumpkins was just rock solid, and it really, I think, thrusted the congregation into this place of faith.
That's
to
right.
believe God that He's actually that people can invite God to be Lord over their finances. And what I think is a faith step to take God at His word is the one who said to test me in this.
That's right.
Pretty
And
awesome.
I will remind you, many of you have heard this. We know we're sometimes preaching to the choir in these podcasts, but it's not very often that the Lord says, test me. And so I want to give you a hint. That's bordering on a commandment. I mean, when God actually says, test me, and we're also told in other places of the Bible by the incarnate God, don't test God. When He invites you into a test, it is more than just if you want to look into it. It's like, man, I'm telling you, you need to test me in this, because it will be one of your breakthroughs on the planet. And that brings me to the other thing that hit me. And it's not like I didn't know this, but if remember when Kevin said, if you heard it, the message, he said this. He says, man, if we talked as often from the sermon pulpit about money as Jesus did in His ministry, 4 months of the year, or was it 3 months? Either
3.
way,
Yep.
We're talking 3 months of the year would be only talking about the role of finances. God knows something about this being a particular kind of high place of our hearts, and He's after it. And that's why I think He says, test me in this area, right? Because you need to test me in this, or else your paradigm's going to be off for most of your life. So it's freaky, though. I got to admit, man, that 90-day challenge, I think it's going to do something among us.
I think a lot,
and reveal a lot of fracture lines as well.
Yeah, and I think people are going to have a lot of testimonies coming out of it. In fact, one thing I shared with the pastors before this series began is usually we have testimonies that come after a sermon series. Yeah. And we have 3 testimonies about financial provision that came before this series started. And to me, I just felt that reality communicated to me that, like, God has been doing something, but it just is. I think He's totally ready to meet people.
That's right. And I'm pretty excited. We have Dr. Randy Clark coming up on November 6th. So first of all, just so you know, we don't know how to almost steward the quiet revival or renewal that's happening. We get to hear as pastors and directors some of the stories of what's going on right now, the healing, the word of knowledge. It brings incredible levels of discernment and decisions that families are trying to make. There's something really beautiful and stirring at this moment. We don't think God's done in that area, and I think it's pretty exciting. We got Dr. Randy Clark, truly gifted in this area of healing. He's showing up on November 6th. I'm wondering if this financial series, isn't prepping our hearts for actual literal physical healing.
Okay.
Because I think when it comes to financial yieldedness to God, it is such a high place in this world right now that when you do battle in that area, I believe it releases spiritual anointing. It releases spiritual movement. Yeah. And so I have to tell you, in some ways that you might prep for healing services that are coming to your church, or prophetic weekends that are coming to your church, the way you might prep for that in other ways, like fasting, etc. I'm going to tell you, I think there's something about us being consecrated in our finances that might actually see part of the movement of healing released in our midst. So,
yep, agreed. It's
not sure, just have this thing. Sorry.
No, I forgive you, Jim.
Done.
That is awesome. Yeah, November 6th, Randy Clark. So that's Saturday night. He's with us. He's not with us on Sunday morning.
That's right.
So I encourage you to be here for that. It's going to be amazing. And what I love is that there's already this thrust of healing already taking place leading up to that. It's not like that's coming in just to jumpstart something as much as it's there to further drive home what God is already beginning. And
closing out, one little closeout here before we say bye. A testimony. I was a service pastor this last weekend, and I got handed 2 words of knowledge. Well, I got handed 4, but 2 in particular. One was for someone that had experienced the trauma in this part of their head, right? And the other was for a woman who was going to be experiencing healing in her right hip. And all of a sudden, I'm just mingling afterwards, and one of the prayer teams comes over, Jim, you might want to come over here and help us pray for this one group. And I'm standing there, and there is a husband and wife just moved by the Spirit because they're like, you nailed us. And she goes, yes, I have a bad right hip. And the guy goes, and I have a head trauma to that part of my brain years ago. So, just for that, first of all, the intimacy of like those words being bookend together and then applying to an exact, and I know you're probably asking, were they healed? I don't know. I was busy. There was a lot of people praying for a lot of people. I know this. I played my part and moved on to another couple, but I'm anxious to hear what God's doing.
Well, I was going to ask you. You brought them up. I'm like, did anybody respond to those? And because Kevin's wanting to do better follow up on like, hey, if we are gonna take a position of saying we believe God is saying this, we need to be much more. Not that we haven't been, but very proactive on following up to confirm. Did that really follow through? So anyway.
There'll be some exciting things, and you're going to hear more and more. We're starting most events now, whether you come to Thrive or whether you are the podcast. We're just going to relay back to you the stories that we get to hear. Remember, we're carried on the shoulders of those who can't always see the landscape we describe, right? And so it's our job to say, hey, guess what we're seeing out on the landscape and bringing that to you. So look forward to more testimonies of what God's doing. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Always a pleasure to be with you guys. Thanks for being with us here today. We look forward to being with you this weekend. We have baby dedication coming up this weekend. So, I think there's over 30 babies being dedicated.
Evangelization through procreation.
Yes. We have a marriage sermon series coming up then soon enough as well. Looking forward to that. All right. You guys have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting EphphatACommunityChurch.com.